I shall say nice things about you. Hey, hello. How are you guys?
We're great.
Here's a fun tip. Put your phone on silent. Ooh, yeah. It's like you're at the movies. Remember those? Fantastic. Welcome, everyone. Thanks so much for being here. I know that the weather's getting nicer and you don't want to be inside anymore, but we really like it when you guys come and stay with us, even when the weather's, good. So we appreciate you being here. Thank you guys. For those of you that are first timers, let's get a little show of hands. If this is your first lecture, welcome. Hello. Look, we're nice. We hope you come back. We hope you keep learning with us. As many of you know, because there's a lot of familiar faces here too, as many of you know, we give out punch cards to anyone that comes to our in-person events. When you fill that punch card out, you get limited edition letterpress artwork from local artists. It's very cool, so make sure you come back and make use of our shameless marketing ploy and come hang out with us. Chicago for Chicagoans is an organization I started almost 8 years ago, which is wild. My name is Patty. Thank you. If you email any of the email addresses you find on our website, they go to me. So, hi, I see you. I see your names. It's actually really hard to cheat and lie on the punch card system because, trust me, if you've come to more than 6 events, I know who you are.
Exactly.
Yes.
Thank you, become a guide.
So for those of you that have a good time, we do this lecture series in the wintertime. Every year the lecture series has a different theme. And then in the summertime, we hit the streets in over 35 different neighborhoods all across Chicago. We have over 35 different lecturers and tour guides that partner with our organization. And so that means you get to take the most local of local tours from somebody who says Narragansett with all the A's. It's stupid. But you really are getting the local, by locals, for locals experience, and that's why we're here. All of our organization's public programming is presented on a pay-what-you-can basis because we believe in the accessibility of information. We believe that anyone should be able to come learn more about their city regardless of their financial situation. And we know you guys are really seasoned Chicagoans. And I'll go check out the tour of my neighborhood, but I'm not sure if I'm going to pay because what are you going to teach me? No, come. Yeah, you don't have to pay up front. And when you learn something, you better give us $20 at the end.
And they always learn.
That's our goal. You always learn something. Guarantee that. Speaking of donations, we are a 501c3 nonprofit. We are over 90% of our funding comes from individual donations, which is really unique to a nonprofit organization. That means if you have a good time today, throw us some cash. We take check, we take credit card, Venmo, PayPal, Zelle, Square, Google Pay, Apple Pay. Firstborn babies. Just kidding. Those are too expensive. But kidneys, great resale value in the black market. So that's fine. We'll take those too. But in all seriousness, if you have money, we're really happy to take it. It helps us pay for insurance. It helps us pay our talented lecturers and tour guides to create fun and cool content for you guys to enjoy. Eventbrite costs money now, so that's where your money goes. If you want transparency in your nonprofit donations, I'll tell you exactly what your money is for. This lecture series this year has focused all about really fun, exciting ways that Chicago has changed the world. The way that our inventions, our inventors, and our Chicago residents have created things that have had a massive impact far beyond our borders. We've talked about a lot of exciting things. Last week we talked about the history of candy and we gave away candy. That's not happening tonight. You'll soon learn. If you're not aware, this topic is forensics. And dead bodies, we didn't want to hand that many away. But this is March. March is Women's History Month. Yay, women. We are a women-run organization. All the women that serve on our board are quite amazing. We are very proud to do that. We're really proud to celebrate women as historians, and we have a really badass lineup of female historians in the month of march talking all about the many women that created many amazing things in all of Chicago history. So make sure, if you haven't already, sign up for the lecture that's occurring 2 weeks from now. Tickets are on sale as of today. It's going to be one of the most exciting topics of the season, integrated medical care. So no matter what race you are, you could come get treated in Chicago at some of our really cool hospitals. So make sure you sign up for that lecture. We expect it will be really popular. Next week, Stephanie is going to be talking about fashionable socialites. So if you haven't already gotten tickets for our upcoming lectures, guys, we only have 3 more left. So yeah, the lecture series is almost over. We've already started planning for tours. The final thing that I will say before I begin my introduction here, I'm done stalling for time, there's no more people in the bar line, is to say that if you are interested in being a lecturer or tour guide for our organization, come on down! We do free Tour Guide 101 trainings. We have those scheduled May 5th and June 9th this year. All the details are posted on our website. Make sure you sign up for that. If you think this sounds kind of cool and you want to study some stuff and then tell other Chicagoans about it, we'll teach you how for free. So check those out as well. Now, the reason I bring up Tour Guide 101 is because your speaker tonight co-presents Tour Guide 101 with myself. She has been giving tours in Chicago for 12, 15 years? 100 years?
13.
13.
Lucky number 13.
She's been giving tours in Chicago for 13 years. We used to give tours together, still do, really. She sits on Chicagoans' board of directors. She acts as a trainer for tour guides. She helps us set policies for tour guides to ensure they're being compensated fairly and treated fairly, because that's really important to us. She does a lot of amazing things for us. She is a very accomplished tour guide. She gives our Uptown tours, our Andersonville tour, so you can learn more from her this summer. Not to mention, she is the unmatched expert in horrible ways to die.
In theater.
Which this talk is not about.
Over the years, Leyla has told us about how bridges used to not be safe. She's told us all the horrible ways you can die in Chicago. She can tell you about any movie palace or movie theater in the city of Chicago in exquisite and sometimes painful levels of detail. She is one of our favorites because she loves all of these things, and she also collects tuberculosis lung samples. So
Oh my God.
without further ado, give it up for Leyla.
Oh, I feel like I have to keep the record straight on that. I don't collect tuberculosis lung samples. They were given to me by an unnamed person who might have just been talking in the microphone, and now I have them. Yeah, it's the only person now who I ever have to ask when she says, I have something for you. I have to go, is it a body part? 'Cause, God, okay. One time.
It was preserved.
Let's move on from this. We don't need to discuss this anymore. So, our topic for tonight that I wanted to go with for this series is innovations in forensics that are tied to the city of Chicago and Chicagoans. And I thought that this was kind of an interesting topic, something that I really wanted to present on for the lecture series this year, because I do really like movie theaters and movie palaces and entertainment, and I tend to talk about that a lot. And I also have given a lot of tours on weird ways people have died in the city, and I thought that this was kind of like a nice extension of that. A little less focused on the gory details and more of the like how and why and how can we look at everything scientifically and the history of how all of that developed. So we'll start in the 1870s. There was a doctor who was living in the city of Chicago at that time. His name was Dr. Richard Upton Piper, Dr. Piper, and he was a microscopist. He liked looking at things underneath the microscope, specifically blood. Who doesn't like looking at blood under the microscope, right? He liked to try and find the differences between animal blood and human blood, the differences between different animals together. He said that human blood and dog and pig blood was pretty close, and it was kind of hard to differentiate from. I feel like modern scientists would disagree with that fact, but I guess when you're looking at a microscope, through a microscope at blood in the 1870s, it's a little bit different. He managed to get blood samples from every animal he could in the Chicagoland area, so that's mostly just domestic animals like pigs, cows, horses, dogs, cats, that kind of a thing. But he tried his best to get samples from other animals from other parts of the world too. At one point, when the Forepaw Circus was set up on the lake shore for a couple days, he reached out to Adam Forepaw, the owner of the circus, and said, "Hey, we don't usually have rhinos and elephants and hyenas in Chicago. Can I get some blood samples from your animals and see what that looks like under a microscope?" And the owner of the circus said, "Yes, of course, sure, why not?" So he went and got blood samples from the hyena, which, of course, the newspaper was like, "This is a ghastly animal, you can never tame it, it's horrible and it's just mean." From the elephant, who they said was very nice and docile and didn't even notice. And they managed to get some blood samples from a rhinoceros too, but they said that the hide of the rhino was so thick that the only place they could get blood from it was like underneath the butt and the back of the thigh. Which sounds like a really annoying place to get a needle poked. Who knows? So he spent a lot of his spare time looking at all these blood samples under the microscope, and he also claimed to have come up with a way to compare blood samples from different humans, and he could tell if blood was from the same person or not, if you gave him two different samples. And he came up with this method by looking at how many blood cells he would find in a small area and kind of getting the average and then comparing that with the same thing from another sample, looking at the shapes of the blood cells. A lot of stuff that I'm not really sure would hold up in court today, but again, this is 1870s research. At that point in time, though, his evidence was taken into court. He testified in several trials, including one that took place in Canton, Ohio in 1876. He was brought out there to testify on behalf of Mrs. Richardson, who was on trial for the murder of her husband. Mrs. Richardson's story, she said that she and her husband had been married for about 20 years. They had a business together that was pretty successful, but her husband was abusive and beat her. At one point, beat her so bad that she was in bed recovering for 3 weeks. So she was trying to go through the divorce process, which is probably understandable and I feel like too nice of a thing to do after your husband beats you like that. But while she was going through the divorce process, she woke up in the middle of the night to her husband on top of her trying to kill her. He had a knife in his left hand and was trying to cut her throat. She said it was in his left hand. He was right hand dominant, so he didn't have great dexterity with it, and he managed to cut her, but it was only superficial. So got some blood on the sheets. She got away from him. She managed to get the gun that he had. He wrestled the gun away from her. He shot her. Again, it was thankfully just a superficial flesh wound on her side. She wrestled him again, got the gun, shot him in the head, and killed him. I feel like I did say I wasn't going to talk about weird deaths, and here we are. This is the very first story.
I can't get away from it.
I can't get away from it. I mean, especially if you're talking about crime, right? In forensics. So anyway, this was Mrs. Richardson's story. Prosecution said that this was all a lie and that she just outright murdered him in cold blood while he was asleep in bed. She got up, shot him in the head, and she made up the story that he tried to cut her throat and shot her in the side. She gave herself those wounds, and the blood stains that she said were from her on the bed, prosecution said, no, that was just from the sheets that was on top of him, and she flipped them over to her side. So this is where they brought in Dr. Piper, because the prosecution basically rested on the fact in the defense saying that if the blood on the sheets matched her, it meant that her story was true and she killed in self-defense, and if it matched him, it meant that her story was BS and she just got up in the middle of the night and killed him. So he went out to Ohio and he got blood samples from her in jail, explained what he wanted to do. She said, sure, of course, take my blood, whatever you need. And he compared her blood under a microscope to what he could see on the sheets, and the blood from the crime scene. And he determined that the blood actually matched the sheets, and it didn't match her husband's blood at all, so therefore her story was true. Also determined that the stains on the sheets were on the underside of the sheets, not on the top side, which meant that if she had just like killed him and flipped the sheets over, it would have been on the wrong side. Also, he was shot in the head, so his blood had brain matter in it, and hers on her side of the bed did not, which I feel like is maybe a bigger indicator than looking in a microscope in the 1870s and saying the blood is the same. So this was blood evidence that was brought and accepted in court. She was charged in the end with, or convicted of manslaughter and not of murder, so a lesser charge, a little bit better from her. Still, it's pretty much self-defense if you ask me. So this isn't the first time that comparison of blood under a microscope was used in a trial, but it is certainly a very early example of this, and it is an early example of Chicago innovation, of Chicago doctors trying to examine this and figure out how they can apply what they're learning to medical science and to crime in general. 1850. Jumping back in time a little bit here. That is when Alan Pinkerton established the Pinkerton Detective Agency in the city of Chicago. Pinkertons are basically a private police / detective agency. They are a little bit controversial, especially for folks in the 1800s, because they were used mostly by corporations and railroads to protect their investments, and they were also used as strike breakers too. So labor unions, general workers, generally not a big fan of the Pinkertons, but they did have a lot of firsts with police work, detectives, detection, forensics in Chicago. Their logo was an eye. This is the first photo that you guys can see on the pamphlet here. Pinkerton's National Detective Agency. Logo is an eye. The slogan says, "We never sleep," which is terrifying. Like, even today, if someone comes up to you and is like, "Yes, this is on my business card," I'm going to be like, "Oh shit, I don't want to deal with these people." So the phrase private eye, that comes from the Pinkerton Detective Agency because of their logo. Pinkertons, by the way, are still around. They're owned by a security company in Europe, and they do still have the eye as a logo, but it's like a modern eye. It's not this like 1850 design that you see here. Beyond being the origin of the term private eye, the Pinkertons were also the first people to hire women as detectives. Kate Warren walked in late 1850s, early 1860s at 23 years old and said, "Hi, I want a job as a detective here." And originally they said, "Absolutely not. Why would we hire you? Because, 1850s of it, and you're not going to hire women to work in that kind of a position." But she was able to convince them that as a woman, she would be able to get into places that men could not go. So she would have new access, and of course, no one is going to suspect a woman detective. So she was able to get a job with them and worked a lot of different cases with them. Maybe even more important than having the first female detective was that in 1870, the Pinkertons started collecting mugshots and coming up with an ID database. They were one of the first people to do it. According to the Pinkerton website today, they say that they are the originators of mugshots, taking those photos and collecting them. That fact is maybe a little bit up for debate because I did find some references to the city of New York taking ambrotypes, so early photographs of criminals back to the 1850s. But 1870 is when the Pinkertons started coming up with this database where they would have photos of criminals and suspects, and they would list out all the information that they had on them. And they continued growing this. So one of the earliest, not the earliest, kind of collections of ID database. And this is something that's going to come up a lot in this talk. So Pinkertons, private agency, have this database. City of Chicago itself didn't start its own official database of criminals until 1884. Prior to this, they were taking photos of criminals, even back as early as like 1858, but it seems to have been kind of sporadic that they were taking photos of people, and they didn't have a specific department to deal with this. They also didn't have a photographer's studio for the police until 1884. Prior to this, if you were an officer and you wanted to get some photos of some criminal that you had just arrested, you would just take them to a private photography studio somewhere downtown.
Glamour shots?
Glamour shots. I'm gonna lower this. Yeah, I hear that and all I could do is like, I just imagine like you just got married and you're at whatever photography studio with your new husband to get these wedding photos that you're going to get, and they're going to be one of like 4 photos you get in your lifetime, but then you have to wait an extra half hour because agents or like officer so-and-so has come in with William Stevenson, the axe murderer, and he's got to get his glamour shots first. So it was kind of rough and scattered until 1884 when the Bureau of Identifications was officially started in the city. And this was headed up for several decades by Captain Michael Evans, who is, I think, the next photo that we have on the sheet here. If I can open the sheet. Oh, no, the next photo here, I forgot. We can see this gentleman who's part of the Marion Hedgepeth game here. This is one of the examples of the Pinkerton cards. So the database that the Pinkertons had, they had a photo like this, and then they had all the information that they had about him written on a card next to it. They tried to organize their database by like actual birth names, if possible. It wasn't always easy to do at that time, and then also by association with whatever gang they were part of. So the next page here, we can see a photo of Michael Evans, who had a few different names here. Here he's listed as a Lieutenant Michael Evans. So he spent 2 weeks training with a photographer studio to learn how to take pictures, and then help set up the photography studio for the police department so they could take pictures of criminals here. He was in charge of this department because he had devised a way of organizing all this information that you have. Because it's one thing to collect mugshots and information of like what they stole when they were born, blah, 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 blah. And it is another thing to be able to access that all quickly. It's all fine and dandy if you've just arrested someone and you're trying to see if you've arrested them before, if you have, 10 photos to look through, but if you have 1,000 or 10,000 or 20,000, it becomes almost impossible, especially without modern computer systems. So he devised a way to organize all of this. And that's why they had him in charge of this. He called this department, or it was called kind of colloquially, the Rogues Gallery. Instead of just the Bureau of Identification, the Pinkertons also called their gallery the Rogues Gallery. It's just kind of a common term for like mug shots and information that you had back in the day for various police stations. They stayed with Captain Evans' system and for 4 years, only until about 1888, and that's when they officially switched over to the Bertillon system here in Chicago. Bertillon system was created by a French police officer, which means it might actually be pronounced Bertillon if you want to go the French route, but this is Chicago where we pronounce des plans des plains, so I'm saying Bertillon. We're going to go with that. So the Bertillon system was a way to, the goal of it was to both organize data that law enforcement departments had, and also be able to correctly identify people as they came in. Because if you just have a mugshot of someone, and you arrest someone, you take their pictures, and he says, yeah, my name is Michael Smith, and you write down the characteristics of Michael Smith, and you say, well, he's really skinny, he's really pale, he has a scar above his lip, and he's got a full head of hair. And then like 2 months later, you arrest someone else and he says, my name isn't Michael Smith, it's William Stevenson or whatever. And this guy is like overweight, he's super tan, he's got a mustache, he's shaved his head. If you just look at those photos, you look at the accompanying marks, they're going to be totally different. And they might actually be the same person. So that's when you wanted to use the Bertillon system, which basically took measurements of different parts of the body that were supposedly not going to change much once you were an adult. So like measuring maybe like here to here, that distance is going to stay the same. Measuring the size of the head. Each measurement would be taken 3 times and then averaged out, and all this information would be put in a card along with photos from multiple angles of the face. So that way, even if this guy comes in and he's, changed his hair, he's gotten a tan, he's gained weight. You can still look at these other measurements and you can say, hey, remember that guy who came in a couple years ago with the huge forehead? This guy also has the huge forehead. We know it's the same person. So it's a unique way of identifying people. Looking at the photos here, kind of going a little bit out of order. We'll go to the one that is very helpfully labeled Bertillon measurements, and you can see there's a doctor like taking measurements of this dude's head, which is kind of funny. He looks a little bit too happy to be having his head measured. I don't know. It's fine. Yeah. So 1888. That's when we officially switched over to the Bertillon system of measurements. Now, it's probably a little different measuring heads nowadays than it would have been, 120, 150 years ago. So Michael Evans, in charge of this department, throughout the late 1800s, his son was also involved with the Bureau of Identification. He had basically an encyclopedic knowledge of people because he dealt with tens of thousands of these Bertillon cards and knew everyone's faces. It's part of his job beyond photographing and organizing and finding information when needed. He would also respond to requests from other cities where they might send mugshots to them and say, hey, have you seen this guy before? Do you know who he is? Newspapers at the time marveled about how much he knew, saying that they could bring in someone that maybe he had never even seen before, but he'd take a look at him and go, I know this feature of yours is really distinct. I've seen this before. And he could pull up a card that someone had sent from another city and say, hey, I think it's this man, and would be right on the dot with it. By the late 1800s, 1897, finding my notes here. Where are my numbers? It doesn't matter. I remember. I thought I didn't. By 1897, the Bureau of Identification had 23,000 Bertillon records on file and 12,000 other records that were not classified with the Bertillon system to help identify people. This was the largest database outside of Paris. So, pretty large. Now, part of the reason that we had such a large database actually goes back to the early 1890s. What happened in Chicago, early 1890s?
The World's Fair.
The World's Fair, yes. And with the World's Fair coming to town, officials were nervous that millions of people coming to the city meant that millions of criminals would see this as an opportunity for them to come in and steal and pickpocket and burglar. So they wanted to really have a robust Bertillon database before this even started. There was a man named George Porteous who went to France for a couple of years to study the Bertillon system. He claimed that he was the person to first introduce this system to the United States. His claims, so take that with a grain of salt, seem to be happening a little bit all over the U.S. at the same time, late 1880s, early 1890s. But he studied this system. He was in charge of the Bureau of Identification for a little while, worked with them throughout his life. And he also went to different prisons in the United States before the World's Fair and tried to get measurements and documentation on people who were in prison, but who were going to be released before or during the time of the World's Fair. Which...
Invasion of privacy.
Yeah, right. Yeah, definitely invasion of privacy. And I don't know, imagine you're some 18-year-old who stole a chicken somewhere, and then you have this guy being you're going to travel 500 miles to Chicago to pickpocket people? I don't think that's going to happen. But he collected a database. On site at the World's Fair, they actually had a Bertillon office as well, along with police headquarters, so that if they were arresting anyone, they could also just very quickly reference this database and see if it was someone they knew and had caught before or not. So this is part of the reason why we had such a huge database at that time. Going back to our photos, with the lovely one here of Michael Evans, right next to it is a photo, quote unquote, of Molly O'Connor. And this was the first photo taken by the police department photographer. So it was the first photo he took for this collection. You'll notice that it's not a photo. It's a drawing, which is kind of why I wanted to include it, because I thought that was really funny. This is from a newspaper article I found from, I think it was around 1897, late 1890s, where they were talking about Michael Evans and his history with the Bureau of Identification, and they included this drawing. And it's a drawing because this is just a few years before newspapers started using actual photographs. So they have a drawing of the first photograph. They said on her backstory too, apparently like this woman stole something, was arrested, had her photo taken, I'm sure was not happy about it, and then never got in the hands of Chicago police again. Just disappeared. So good for her. She hid well, or she went straight after that. Who knows? On the flip side of that, you can see this photo here with George M. Hugg, Bates murder suspect. So this is an example of the kind of photo IDs that they had in use with the Bertillon system in Chicago for the Bureau of Investigation. This is from there around 1904, 1905. So just an example. You can see all the measurements at the top, like his head length, 19.3, head width, 15. On the flip side of that, too, you can see a photo from, I think, the 1920s, which just has some lovely flapper ladies looking at one of the, identification pull-out cabinets that they had at the Bureau of Identification. So they're basically, just tourists looking at mugshots in the gallery. Yeah, privacy was a different beast back then, for sure. Or the same, true. The internet has changed a lot of rules. George Porteous, who I mentioned earlier, was involved with the Bureau of Identification, ended up being in charge of a new agency that was formed in Chicago in 1897 called the National Bureau of Criminal Identification. This is the point in the talk where everything I talk about has the words national or bureau or criminal or investigation or identification. It gets really confusing with the names of all these groups. But the National Bureau of Criminal Identification was made up originally of it was a centralized collection of photographs and Bertillonage data established in 1897 from records compiled for the 1893 World's Fair. When this organization was formed, they also absorbed all of the mugshots in the database that the Pinkertons had collected up until that time. So they took control of it. It was built by the National Union of Police Chiefs, and the idea behind this was trying to get kind of a national database together of different criminals. At this point in time, different municipalities are using different systems to kind of try and keep track of people. The Bertillon system is very popular, but it is not universal within the United States. So though we might have a lot of documentation of people here in Chicago, Milwaukee might be on a totally different system. And then if we're trying to cross-reference things, if someone has been somewhere, it's going to take a lot longer to actually consolidate all of that data. So the idea behind the National Bureau of Criminal Identification, also just known as the National Bureau of Identification, was just to compile all this information nationally and try and come up with a standard and have a standard database. It was located in Chicago, but this group didn't last too long. By 1902, they moved to DC. They ended up disbanding, and they were absorbed by the Federal Bureau of Investigation, which was then renamed the FBI. So you can find the origins of criminal databases go all the way back to 1870 Chicago with the Pinkertons. Kind of all of this collecting all the way through, which I find really fascinating. The Bertillon system, prominent late 1800s through the early 1900s until about 1904, 1905. And then a new way of IDing people came about that was very popular and is still pretty prevalent today. Any guesses? Fingerprints. Yeah, you guys are all smart. Why take a million measurements of someone's forehead when you can just get someone's fingerprints, right? So the 1904 World's Fair in St. Louis is when they had exhibits on fingerprints in the United States and really kind of brought it to the attention of the public and law enforcement. They had Sergeant John K. Ferrier from Scotland Yard there to demonstrate how to take fingerprints and how to look at them and observe them and show how they are unique to every person. Michael Evans' son, Emmett Evans, went to the World's Fair to check out fingerprints. Michael didn't really think highly of it at first. He was like, I think it's a fan. I think the Bertillon system is going to be better. But his son came back and basically said, no, you're wrong. This is the future. This is what we need to do. So they started working with fingerprints here in Chicago. And in 1905, Chicago police became the first city to actually start fingerprinting criminals. So pretty early on with that. Now, another person who went to the World's Fair in St. Louis and learned about fingerprints was Mary Holland. You can see her lovely headshot, literally just her head, on this next photo here. Mary Holland was a detective. She ran the Holland Detective Agency, which was located in the Schiller Building, and her husband wrote a law enforcement magazine called The Detective. She went to the World's Fair, she met Sergeant Ferrier, she learned about fingerprints, and she thought it was awesome. She thought it was the best thing. After the World's Fair ended, she ended up going over to UK and to Scotland Yard, and she studied fingerprints there, and she passed multiple certifications on how to identify fingerprints. At that point in time, we are, I think it was like 1902 or something was when the UK started allowing fingerprint evidence in trials. So she is trained in this, but it is still brand new. About 1905, 1906, you have newspapers saying that, oh, maybe this stuff will actually be used in courts in the US one day. We don't know. And it was, of course, in Chicago for the first time in 1910. This was the murder of Clarence Hiller. Clarence was middle of the night at home asleep, and he woke up to the sounds of his family screaming and yelling that there was someone in the house trying to rob them. So he got up, he found someone in the house, he fought him, the burglar took out a gun, shot him, killed him, burglar ran out of the house, disappeared. Short while later, police were aware of this, and they came across a man named Thomas Jennings, who was only about a half mile away, who was out of breath, he was sweaty, he had a ripped overcoat, and he had blood on him. So they arrested him for the murder of Clarence Hiller. That in itself is suspect, but it is not necessarily proof of murder. But when the murderer had fled the Hiller residence, he managed to put his left hand on a fence post that had been painted early that day. The paint was still very tacky, and he left 4 very clear fingerprints on the fence post. So they basically said if Thomas Jennings' fingerprints match the fence post, he's basically signed the murder scene with his signature. We know it's him. We know he was there, and he was not supposed to be. So Mary Holland was one of a few fingerprint experts that were called up to testify in this trial and testified that, yes, the fingerprints on the fence post matched Thomas Jennings, and therefore he was the murderer. He was convicted, and he was sentenced to hang for this murder. Of course, they appealed it, and they actually brought this case up to the Illinois Supreme Court. So it basically called into question, can we accept fingerprint evidence or not for crime scenes? And the Supreme Court said that, yes, it was basically a signature. We agree with the science. You can't accept it. So that was a landmark case for the state of Illinois that said, yes, we allow fingerprints, and also for the United States in general. It's an often cited case saying that, yes, this is good scientific evidence that you can follow. So first case in the United States with fingerprint evidence in Chicago, with a woman expert leading it. Woo! And on to the next notes. And an awkward drink break while I coat my throat with something that's not my own spit. I don't know how to enter that break without making it weird. So now we're going to 1920s, early 1930s. 1929, there's a pretty big, well-known crime that happens in the city of Chicago. The St. Valentine's Day Massacre, yes! I had one very unsure but accurate answer from the corner here. Oh, sweet. Oh, thank you very much. Appreciate it, appreciate it.
They're slamming on your drinks, though. You need a drink.
St. Valentine's Day Massacre happened on Valentine's Day, 1929. There was immediate enormous pressure on the police department to figure out what happened. Most notably, to find out if there were actually police that were involved in the Valentine's Day Massacre or not. The murderers went to the crime scene dressed in police uniforms. They were driving a car that looked like a police car. They had Tommy guns that could have been police guns. They weren't sure. So the city didn't have any way on hand to try and tell this information to see if there were actual cops that were corrupt and that were involved in the murder here. So they ended up calling in Colonel Calvin Goddard from New York, who was a ballistics expert, to come take a look at the crime scene, analyze the evidence, and see what he could determine. And he was able to determine that the guns used were not police issues, and he actually found the guns in Michigan, and they figured out, yeah, there were not actual police that were involved in this murder. Thank you so much. Cheers. But having to bring someone in from New York to figure out this information just kind of brought to the forefront that there was something missing with the police department in Chicago. So Calvin Goddard stayed on in the city, and he worked to help found the Scientific Crime Detection Laboratory, which opened about 6 months after the Valentine's Day Massacre in the middle of 1929. He formed this after an 80-day trip to Europe, where he went to go see how Europeans were hiring police officers, training police officers, and what kind of advancements they had made with forensics and scientific analysis of crime scenes. And he came back, and his results are basically the foundation for the Scientific Crime Detection Laboratory. He found that there were a lot of differences and that the United States was basically woefully behind Europe at this point in time. Said that the Europeans were hiring cops that were, they were chosen for, quote, high education and marked ability. Well, that was not the case in the United States. He said that in Europe, the people working in these positions and investigating crimes tended to be there for a very long time, so they took the job a little bit more seriously, where in the United States, it was more of a job that you had for a little while and then might move on from, so maybe not taken as seriously. We also just didn't have any kind of scientific developments that they had over in Europe. Again, we're Chicago, we're one of the biggest cities in the US, and we had to call in a ballistics expert from New York to look at things, so big deficiency there. So the Scientific Crime Detection Laboratory basically had three main goals during its existence. First of all, they wanted to act as a laboratory space so that they would have experts in ballistics, toxicology, pathology, polygraphs they worked a lot with, as a resource for the police department, anyone else investigating suspicious deaths and crime scenes to use. And they also wanted to teach law enforcement how to work with crime scenes, and they also wanted to teach the public how to work with crime scenes, because at this point in time, officers and the public don't know. So if there is a murder, the officers are going to be walking over things. They might be washing blood off the walls because it's in the way and they don't want to get their uniforms dirty. They're going to let reporters in, and people who are just curious onlookers, they're going to walk through things too, and cops are going to let that happen. And we wanted to kind of stop that. So so yeah, the goals were, we need to use science, we need to teach the public what to do, and we need to teach law enforcement what to do. And they really went at this full force. The Scientific Crime Detection Laboratory had a magazine that they put out that was all about science and crime, forensics, that was aimed at law enforcement. They had lectures and seminars that they gave to different law enforcement offices, but also to like Rotary clubs and high schools and colleges. They did a like short film reel with Paramount Pictures that would have been shown in movie houses, all about forensics. They even set up an exhibit at the World's Fair in 1933 here in Chicago in the Hall of Sciences that was all about like ballistics and polygraph tests to help educate the public and any other officers who might be around on these advancements in science. They had a seminar program that they put together as well, where they encouraged police departments to send officers so that they could learn more about these things and learn how to properly handle crime scenes. When they first opened in 1929, they had 14 people on staff. They had a toxicologist, a firearm identification specialist. They had someone who was knowledgeable in psychology and deception testing. They had a photographer, someone good with microscopes. Pretty much everything you could want in 1930s crime detection. All of this was really great, but it was kind of a big ask for a new department. And especially a new department that was set up in the 1930s. Scientific Crime Detection Laboratory was not originally part of the Chicago Police Department. They actually opened it as an independent nonprofit that was associated with Northwestern University, and it was the first independent crime detection laboratory in the United States. And they opened it up this way to be independent and not officially affiliated with the police, because they didn't want to have to deal with politics in the city and where people might be hired or fired based on who they know and not what they know. So they wanted to be impartial and just on the side of science here. But during the Depression, 1930s, magazines cost money, going to these seminars cost money. People were interested at first. Like the first class that they held, the first seminar, they sold it out. They had a wait list. A lot of people were interested. Next one they had to cancel because they didn't have enough people interested in it. So people couldn't really afford a lot of this, and there was also a lot of hesitation from law enforcement at the time to suddenly accept science into how they did their police work. A lot of old school officers kind of saw it as like, yeah, doctors need to be doctors, cops are cops, we have to go on cops' instincts, we have to do this, we don't want to deal with all the science stuff. So while like law enforcement would be interested, it was really hard and slow to actually change over to kind of get these methods through. So by 1938, the department just couldn't keep itself up anymore, and they were sold to the city of Chicago, and that became the start of the city's crime lab. We absorbed them. And one of the big effects from the Scientific Crime Detection Laboratory actually came from the first seminar that they had. There was Special Agent Charles Apple, who was an agent with the FBI. He heard what the Scientific Crime Detection Lab was doing in Chicago. He heard about these seminars that they were leading, and he was super jazzed about it. He said, "This sounds great. We need to learn more about this." So he went to the training course, said it was very mentally draining, and he learned all sorts of different things. He took this information back to the FBI. He talked to Hoover and basically said, we need to get our own scientific crime detection lab. So the FBI Technical Lab opened in November of 1932. So right after they started these courses, just a couple years after the Scientific Crime Detection Lab opened. So the technical lab for the FBI, where they process everything, was inspired by the lab that we started here in Chicago as the first independent lab. Yeah. This brings us to the last person I want to discuss. Might be the next one on here. Let's see. Oh, it is. It's the literal poster child for the event tonight. Though she is far from a child here, Frances Glessner Lee. How many people here are familiar with Frances Glessner Lee in the nutshell studies? Yeah. Glessner House? Yeah. She's pretty well known. So Frances Glessner Lee was born in 1878, and she is known as the mother of forensics. She did a lot for the field of forensics in the United States, and it's kind of crazy learning about her because she basically was just a grandma with a lot of money and a lot of interest in like crime scenes and unnatural deaths, and she put all of this together. She was born 1878. She is the heiress to International Harvester. She grew up in, so lots of money. She grew up in the Glessner House, which is a Richardson Romanesque revival house that was the start of the Chicago Architecture Center on Prairie Avenue. It's beautiful. It's open. They do tours. You should totally go take tours there. But she got private lessons there. She learned all the things that you would learn as a young lady in the late 1800s. She made models for a family member's birthday. She made a 1-inch to 1 square foot model of the Chicago Symphony Orchestra because the family was very into the Chicago Symphony Orchestra to the point where like they would have members come over on their birthdays to like serenade them in the morning while they woke up. They had a lot of money and a lot of connections, right? Yeah. She ended up getting married. She had several children, and then the marriage didn't last, and by 1919 she was divorced. She was divorced. Her kids grew up. They all got married. So she was just alone, kind of doing whatever she wanted with all of this money, and she split her time between Chicago, and she also spent a lot of time, especially later on in her life, living at the Rocks, which was the estate they had in, I believe, New Hampshire on the East Coast. And it was in the early 1930s that she started getting closer to Dr. George McGrath. This was, he was a medical examiner who had been friends with her brother when her brother went to Harvard. She wanted to go to Harvard when she was young, by the way, but her parents wouldn't let her because women didn't go there. Boo, indeed. And she ended up recuperating from a surgery in the same place as Dr. McGrath. And so they got to talking a lot. And he was talking about his work as a medical examiner and what he did to investigate suspicious deaths. And she was super into this. She had always been interested in weird deaths. Suspicious deaths. Yeah. Didn't mean to pull it there, but here we are. Yeah, the millions of dollars really helps things here. So as soon as she fully recovered from her surgery, she ended up talking to Harvard, and she founded the Harvard Department of Legal Medicine. And she basically went to them and said, there is a deficiency in legal medicine and forensics in the United States. You need to have a department based on it. You should have Dr. George McGrath, who also already works for you, lead this department. Also, I have millions of dollars. Here's money for his salary, and here's money to fund the department. And Harvard was like, okay. And she did that a lot. So she founded that. She ended up collecting over 1,000 books on like anatomy, including rare editions back to the Middle Ages, and then donating it all to Harvard as the Dr. George Burgess McGrath Library there. She founded these seminars as well, which were called the Harvard... They were called HAPS seminars, Harvard Associates in Police Sciences seminars, where she would train people. And she did a lot of independent study on her own. She would assist Dr. McGrath in autopsies to study more about the human body. She learned to observe crime scenes to figure out what you would and would not want to take away as evidence from crime scenes, and she put all of this to work in these seminars. The seminars lasted from, I think they started like early 1940s or so through the 1950s. She led them all. She taught them all. She worked with police departments all over the East Coast trying to kind of connect the dots, where she was seeing that there was lapses in forensics where maybe people needed more training. She would go to them, she would connect them to other people who would give training. She would fund things for this. She ended up talking to Edgar Hoover at the FBI about this and saying how we need to have more national training for law enforcement on forensics. These seminars that she hosted, the HAPS seminars, they were a week long, and at the end of it, she would invite all the policemen to a fancy dinner that was held at the Boston Ritz-Carlton. And she had china specifically made just for these seminar dinners that was gold-plated and cost thousands of dollars. They said in today's money she spent somewhere, I think it was around like $25,000 for a dinner for 40 people. They just got like the best of the best at the ends of these seminars, so like people actually wanted to go to them and learn all these things because you got treated really well. They got like fancy drinks, cartons of cigarettes, all these cigars, crazy things. And the other thing that she created for use in the HAP seminars were the nutshell studies of unexplained deaths. The thing that we all know about, yes. And she created these because this was where there was a deficit that she saw and she discussed with other officers for training new officers. How do you train someone to observe a crime scene? How do you train someone to look through a room like this and see what information you do and you don't need? And they said, well, you can't take people to actual crime scenes during training because you don't know when crimes are going to exist. Also, kind of weird, tacky. You also don't really want to use photographs because, yeah, you can look at pictures, but it's just not the same as actually being there. So she thought back to the model of the CSO that she had created when she was younger, and she decided that she was going to create these scenes of unexplained deaths so that people, while they couldn't look through the crime scenes, they could still kind of stick their head in and look at all of the information and figure out what they wanted to gather. So she made 20 of these in total. There are 18 that still remain. She had her carpenter put together boxes for all of these, and she was exceedingly meticulous and exact with how these crime scenes were put together. For each one, they were all based on actual unexplained deaths. Some of them eventually explained, but she would change small details. So like where one death that ended up being like a suicide that was in a basement, she would change the details so that it was actually a murder, but it took place in a barn instead. Putting these crime scenes together, for instance, for the barn scene that she had her carpenter go to an old barn that was on her property, take some of the 100-plus-year-old floorboards, strip them down so they were tiny, the right size floorboards, sand them, and then lay them properly in these scenes. Hinges she needed for doors. Everything worked. All the cabinets, all the doors and windows, everything opened. All the lights and electricity actually worked in these scenes. But the hinges that she was able to get when she was making them in the 1940s were not the right size. They were too big. So she bought them while they were too big and then would hand cut them down to the right size. In one scene, she had a linoleum floor that she wanted to look really worn. So she took the linoleum and took a cloth and spent hours just rubbing it down. So it looked like people had been walking on it for decades. Like hand-rolled tiny little cigarettes that were this big to put the crime scenes. Like I said, she had studied decomposition, so the actual like little dead doll figurines that she had in there would be painted the right colors for whatever stage of decay they were supposed to be in for the scene. Yeah, use like wire to have limbs sticking out to represent rigor mortis. Was very intense. Oh yeah, my favorite fact about putting the scenes together was that there was a scene with a kitchen and she wanted to have a hand mixer, and the hand mixer that she found was like a solid gold bauble that you would have on a chain. So she got it and then painted it silver and then put it in the background in the kitchen. I said that like it's a solid gold thing. It probably would have cost a lot of money, but she just had millions of dollars, so it didn't matter. Just bought it, painted it, put it in the background, whatever. Yeah, miniatures. So yeah, she put all these details in the scenes because she just was a very meticulous person, and she also didn't want police officers who were reviewing them to feel like they were playing with dolls. So she wanted something that was extremely realistic. So the nutshell studies, when people were using them for training, they're still used for trainings today. They still do have these HAP seminars. Though the HAP seminars nowadays, I guess, don't end at the Ritz-Carlton on like gold dinnerware. It's like steakhouses, so it's a little less fancy. But when you would be analyzing a scene, you would be assigned one, you would be given an hour and a half to look through it, see what you observed, and you would be given some information on the scene as well, maybe some witness statements. And after the end of that hour and a half, you would have to present to the rest of the group what you noticed and what you found out. So Francis we can see in these photos here with her miniatures, looking very much like her grandmother, which is pretty fun. Next page, you can see a group photo here from one of the HAPS seminars. And it's hard to see in this photo, but she is at the very, very back here, just sitting down at the table. It is all of these policemen and then just Grandma Lee in the background there. And the last two pictures here are of one of the nutshell scenes. This one was called Dark Bathroom. So we have the kind of larger photo of it here. You can see there is a body/doll in the bathtub there. And then on the back page, you can see kind of a clearer close-up of the body itself in the bathtub. So fun fact, someone over here just mentioned the miniature rooms, the Thorn rooms at the Art Institute. Apparently she reached out to, I think, one of the people who made like furniture for them and basically said, your stuff is too nice and fancy. I need like older stuff that you can only imagine ever finding it at a secondhand shop. The scenes that she put together, she tended to feature places that were more for people living in poverty and middle-class dwellings and not like the upper-class dwellings that she had been living in her whole life, which is an interesting choice. Well, let's talk about here the dark bathroom scene. Some information on that. The date that this suspicious death took place was November in 1896. So also interesting that she's going way back to the 1890s when this was created in the 1940s. The deceased in the bathtub here, her name is Maggie Wilson. And then you have a witness statement from her neighbor named Lizzie Miller. The witness statement here says, I roomed in the same house as Maggie Wilson, but knew her only from when we met in the hall. I think she had fits, seizures. A couple of male friends came to see her fairly regularly. On Sunday night, the men were there, and there was a lot of drinking going on. Sometime after the men left, I heard the water running in the bathroom. I opened the door and found her just as you see her. So you get these clues, and you have to look at this, and you have to kind of make some guesses as to what's going on. Now, while all of these were based off of real crimes, real unexplained deaths, she did change the details a little bit, as I mentioned, and what these are all supposed to exactly be is not released to the public because they are still used as training tools. And you don't want to use these as training tools if you know the answer is William Stevenson, the axe murderer, killed her, I don't know. But some things that you can notice in this scene are the fact that, yeah, she's in the bathtub here with the water on her face, but her legs are sticking straight out, so therefore rigor mortis has been set in. Witness statement says that she was drinking with a lot of men, but you'll notice that the bottle here only has one glass, so that's kind of sus. To ruin a reputation? All the men, all the unknown men here, yeah. So yeah, ways you can examine this. Now, Frances spent basically the second half of her life. Oh, I moved the page I wanted right to the front. Spent the second half of her life helping to advance forensics in the United States. By the time she died in 1962, just before she turned 84. She was a police captain for the State Police of New Hampshire, which they joked was like an honorary title, but when asked about it, the police said no, she actually had full police authority that you would get as a captain, so she could arrest people. But she never did. But beyond that, she also was an honorary police captain in Maine, for the Maine State Police, with the Vermont State Police, with the Massachusetts State Police, with the Virginia State Police, with the Connecticut State Police, and she was a captain with the Chicago Police. She was an honorary major with the Kentucky State Police. She was an honorary captain with the U.S. Navy, and she had an honorary doctorate of laws from the New England College and an honorary degree from Drexel University. Wow. Yeah. So she had all of this knowledge, and yeah, she never actually went to college when she was younger because she wasn't allowed to. So yeah, that's it. I don't know how to wrap that up. A few forensic first, some interesting touch points in kind of the development of forensics and crime scene detection here in Chicago, where it all started.
Questions?
So just a comment, so in Glessner House, in that one room, you can see at least one of these scenes.
Oh yeah?
Oh, yeah.
I don't remember. I've been to Glessner House, but it's been like 6 or 7 years since I've been there. Okay.
I took a tour, so maybe last year. I went on a Mother's Day, not a mother, but still Mother's Day tea, and you get to go on a tour also. So anyway, the one room that was sort of devoted, like her bedroom, they did have these little scenes showing that, and this is one of the forensic scenes that she created.
Yep.
It was just very unusual.
I mean, yeah, it's very unusual.
They're having a birthday party for her on Monday at Glessner House.
Oh, really?
Who wants to go? That sounds amazing. The comment we just had was on Monday, apparently Glessner House is having a birthday party for Francis Glessner Lee. So some kind of an event, yes.
Comments for the end, questions for now.
I actually have a question. How did her family, Francis Glessner, yeah, that's right, Glessner Slay. How did her family feel about her getting into forensics? Did they think it was a silly hobby? Did they appease her? Did they just ignore it? You know, being she was from a rich family, I could see them saying, this is something scandalous you shouldn't be getting into.
So question is, what did Francis Glessner Lee's family think of her getting into forensics as from a well-off socialite family?
Yeah.
Short answer is I'm not quite sure, but I don't think they would have thought too much of it because she did get into it when she was older.
Oh.
So her parents were older. I know they died after she was on this path, but her children were married and living their own lives at that point in time, and I know she was still supporting them too. So, yep.
So I know the fingerprints like on the paint is very distinctive, but when/where, if you know, did they start to like dust for fingerprints, you know, like realize that people left them behind and they were invisible? Did that start here too?
Yes. Sorry, I'm loading information from my brain, which means I'm staring at the corner. I believe that also came up with like Scotland Yard early 1900s and like some of the things that they were talking about with the World's Fair.
Repeat it.
Question is, leaving fingerprints on wet paint is very distinctive, but when did they start working with like using whatever powders to pick up actual fingerprints that you can't always see with the naked eye? And I believe that is something that would have originated at about the same time. I think this case just happened to actually get really distinctive fingerprints. And I believe it was in this case as well where the defense for Thomas Jennings tried to say that it was BS, and the defense attorney said, I bet you can't get my fingerprints from this paper, and they were able to successfully lift his fingerprints and match him from the paper, which kind of torpedoed the defense.
Do you know where the remaining of the rooms are?
Someone on the comments online said the Smithsonian did a famous exhibit. And
They
they're
did.
now in Baltimore.
That sounds about right. The comment was, where are the nutshell studies now? The Smithsonian did do an exhibit on them in 2017, I think it was, and it was like the first time that they were open to the public. 'Cause usually they are reserved for study, and comment online said they're in Baltimore, which I will go with that because I don't remember where they are right now. East Coast.
I got another question. Does the FBI, because I know you will visit the FBI when you go to D.C., do they recognize Chicago, that they learn stuff from Chicago? Do they even mention us, or are we just kind of like, we didn't learn anything from Chicago? Because I didn't know that we were the first in a lot of this stuff. So.
I have no idea what they say on site, but that information I got from a history page on the FBI website. So,
Okay, so they at least-
so they acknowledge it, yeah.
Give us prep, okay.
Yeah. Question in the back.
Certainly. Great macabre subjects and wonderfully delivered. It seems cliche, but can we ask you about Henry Holmes and the Devil in the White City?
Oh, yeah.
And if there's anything you can tell us about how they kind of solved that mystery.
Or botched it.
Or botched that mystery.
The question is, can I talk about H.H. Holmes? And wow, what a question. I am the wrong person to ask about this. Yeah, if you want to learn more about Holmes, you should ask Adam Selzer. You should read his book, H.H. Holmes, The True Story of the White City Devil, because he has done an amazing amount of research into that story, and I don't know it well enough off the top of my head to be able to talk about it. The little bit that I will say is that when I was doing research for this story, I did find newspaper articles that was talking about like the Bertillon measurements that they took of Holmes. And what stood out to me is they said he was like 5'7¼ inches tall and weighed, I think, like he weighed 148 pounds. And when I read that, my first thought was, I can take him. I'm that height, and I'm bigger than him. I can take it. That's all I'll say about Holmes.
All right, big round of applause.
Thank you guys so much for listening today. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Hope you guys learned something. If you did, you should totally donate to this wonderful organization. Remember, I was talking about the Scientific Crime Detection Laboratory, and they couldn't stand because they couldn't make enough money on their own because they were a nonprofit. You should also donate to this nonprofit. And also, oh wait, this is for slides. I don't know what I'm doing. You should look at the slides here, and then you should go to chicagoforchicagoans.org/donate to actually donate.